don't have to count it as reserve. And so they can more or less print money to buy the government debt. So it hasn't been approved yet. It was a letter, but it's clearly those kinds of things. They start with a letter and then they come with a Federal Reserve proclamation that this is what we're going to do. And they did it in 2020. And they did it in 2020 because at that point in time, they needed to do it because the debt, they were having a hard time selling the debt then as well. So to me, it's a big deal. And I'm not sure the market's fully absorbed it, although, you could also argue maybe the market has absorbed it because the two sound money assets, gold and Bitcoin, are both at record highs or, very close to. Gold's backing off a bit today, but gold had been constrained within a range of kind of a $2,100 top, $2,050, $2,100 top. And it broke through that rather decisively in the last couple of weeks. So, I think the wider world is awakening to the issues that many of us in this area have been talking about for some time, and that is that we have a sovereign debt problem, and that the likelihood is that the solution of the government will be to monetize it, and that goes to the letter I just referred to. So that's kind of the climate we're in, and I kind of see the sky as the limit for both of these assets. I expect they'll be higher in a month, and I expect they'll be much higher in 6 months. So, and that's what they want to have happen. They want to have interest rates come down so that their funding costs are lower. The banks can buy these bonds, and often they do, and then they quickly flip them to the Fed or flip them to somebody else, or they can leave them on their balance sheet, but they're somewhat constrained in terms of what they can leave on their balance sheet because of what you referred to, the SLR, the supplementary leverage ratio. And, it's confusing even to experts like me. It's somewhat confusing how this whole mechanism works because it's kind of tricky monetary plumbing that nobody really pays attention to. But boy, when this ISDA letter came out, those of us who were in the know, Fed Guy 12, Joseph Wang or Luke Groman, or those of us who are watching Lynn, or those who are watching the monetary plumbing very carefully, like, holy shit! If I'm reading this correctly, this means that these banks can buy as many of these bonds as they want, no problem, and they can create the money to do it. And so it's kind of, broadly speaking, it kind of looks like QE infinity. Now, because of the way it's sort of backdoor and subtle, obviously the Fed right now manipulation, and guess what? They get it. I mean, Bitcoiners get it, and people are getting it, and they're saying, okay, if you're going to debase my currency, I'm going to buy a currency that by definition cannot be debased above and beyond the programmatic formula. So, and this is why Bitcoin's at new all-time highs, and I expect it's going to go much higher. So,
you've long been a huge proponent of gold too. Are you shifting your stance a little bit? And are you telling people
and some gold guys are getting mad at me. I'm not down on gold. And I never have been. I'm pivoting, or not pivoting. I'm trending away towards gold just because, let me make a couple things straight. I think gold is going to do incredibly well in the monetary debasement that's coming, but I think Bitcoin is going to do much better than that. And so, as an investment manager, my job is to earn the top risk-adjusted return for my clients, and I view Bitcoin as a better risk-adjusted return than gold. This far into the game, and now having a lot of the risks in my mind in Bitcoin gone away. I mean, perfect example. One of the biggest risks I think in Bitcoin
because I think it's relevant to these conversations with Bitcoin.
It really is. It's a mistake. And Saylor asked me. It was kind of humbling that Saylor's asking me a question on stage. I was like, wow, this is interesting. It's a mistake that a lot of investors make, I think, and that is to say, you've got a gain and you're feeling good about it, and you think, oh, this can't last, and maybe it's overpriced now, and therefore I'll sell it. I bought Microsoft in '86 when it went public, 14 times trailing, growing 40% a year, and I made, 3 times my money on it, and I sold it for a logical reason, actually, because it was the only money I had to make a down payment on a condominium, and I wanted to own a condominium. So, but had I held on to it, it turned out it went up another 4,000x, and I missed all of that. You're right. And
wow. So you bought at what price and you sold at what price?
Well, back then it was probably $15, but split adjusted, wow. It was a 6 cent. It was a 6 cent stock, and I think Microsoft today is trading at 200 and something. So, it's crazy. I mean, I left a ton of money on the table, but who could know? And by the way, most stocks aren't Microsoft. I mean, the reason that worked, the killer stocks. If you really look at some of the greatest stock returns that have been made in the last 30 years of investing. They've generally been
go online to buy books, and they totally missed out. And the rare few who said, you know what, I'm going to take a chance on this. I'm going to put $1,000 on it, or I'm going to buy 1,000 shares, $7,000 at the time. Like, they went on to make a ton of money, but it
millions and
really
millions
is,
and millions of dollars.
it's
Yeah,
crazy rare. I mean, most companies obviously do not perform well. You can even look at the S&P, right? Just a couple of companies have all the gains and everything else is
correct.
underperforming. So if you can pick the right one, it's great. But to your point about the monopoly network, that is what Bitcoin is. It's the dominant monopoly technology network, and
Right.
it's accessible to everyone, largest addressable market of any asset in the entire world. And you don't have the risks that you have with a company, with leadership and product liability and all that.
Exactly.
So really,
Exactly.
really
I've always
incredible.
that's one of the reasons I've pounded the table about it. I just, because I've been an investor for my whole career, and I mean, I never underestimate the ability of management teams to screw stuff up.
Yeah.
They do
Sure.
it constantly. And here we also know that the third unspoken mandate is functioning financial markets. And we've had 5 or 6 instances, or call it 10 instances over the last 20 years, where the financial markets have threatened to not function, and the Fed prints. And the most recent one was, March. Well, there are a lot of them. I mean, there was a mini one with Silicon Valley Bank in March of 2023, right? That was a break in the system and a failure, and it could have led to a bank run, $17 trillion of bank deposits, being in trouble, and yet they created a BTFP and they bailed it out. They were experiencing one last fall when the 10-year went to 5%, and they came out with all that jawboning and started saying, "Oh, no, 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 don't worry, we're taking rates down," because the system is so highly leveraged that it cannot handle higher interest rates, and yet higher interest rates are what's required to tamp down inflation, and so they've really got themselves in a pickle. So it's hard, but it's very hard to know exactly how the cards are going to come down, how it's going to unfold. But we can be sure that if, for example, the CR world is going to look, and for your generation, my kids' generation,
Yeah.
but yeah, what you've described, they're all suffering. They're all in their 20s. They're like, "Hey, Dad, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to buy a house," and I get it, and they're all doing fine, and I get
Yeah.
it. I mean, it's the system is really, really broken, and
Yeah.
that's why it's, as we all say, right? Fix the money, fix the world. I mean, and you've
Absolutely.
got all these political people pointing fingers at each other, not really, many of them not really realizing what the core issue is, and the
Mhm.
core issue is the unsound money, right?
Yep. Well, I'm in that boat too. I know what that feels like. It's like my dream is to have a home, and I just want a place where I never have to move again. I want that idea of,
Yeah,
like, the
you'll get it. You'll
home
get
that
it.
your kids grow up in and all that. So, but I hope I don't have to sell my Bitcoin. Maybe I can figure out a way around that. But
No, I don't think you'll have to.
as we start to wrap up, I wanted to get your thoughts or predictions surrounding the election, because I think we're in a really interesting time. And luckily, Bitcoin is apolitical, though not many people realize that yet. But
In 8 years or 12 years. And I also think he's
wow,
probably going to be I also think he's probably going to be the richest man in the world. And knowing what I know about him, I actually think that would be an incredibly good thing for the United States, because I think he's a very strategic thinker, and I actually think he's a kind and generous human being
agree.
who would actually do a pretty good job as a
Yeah,
president of this country, and maybe restructuring, kind of the broken politics that we have. I mean, we clearly need a massive political restructuring. We need term
yeah,
limits. We need money out of
yeah.
politics. We need rank order voting. There are a ton of solutions. I mean, it's the founding fathers had a great idea, and the politicians have managed to kind of stray quite away from that idea. We need to get back to the basics. So.
I mean, you bring up such great points. It's crazy to see what has